Good morning, folks. I'd like to talk to you about a good friend of mine. He passed away in 2003, named Bill Dakin. Bill was what was called a Marine Raider. They were elite shock troops, very lightly armed, would go in behind the enemy over in the Pacific. Bill was involved in what was, people think of the Battle of Guadalcanal. He was there on the very first day of it, which was August 7th, 1942. But he went to the island of Tulagi. There was more fighting on the island of Tulagi that first week and a half or two than there was on Guadalcanal. He then went to Guadalcanal in the end of August of 42. Was involved in some terrible battles for what was called Edson's Ridge or Bloody Ridge. What the Japanese were after were the two airports that we named Henderson Field on Guadalcanal. If they could control Guadalcanal, they could cut off the lines of communication to Australia. We didn't want to lose Australia as an ally, so we fought hard on Guadalcanal. Bill was in many horrible fights there. He then, in the summer of 1943, fought on the island of New Georgia, which is still in the Solomon Island chain. They were called the British Solomon Islands. That was a vicious fight, too, about 30 days, swamps, jungles, disease, instant death. He then, the Marine Corps did away with the Marine Raiders, and he was put into the 4th Marine Division. And in the 4th Marine Division, Bill missed the fighting on Saipan and Tinian because we think he had, and he didn't tell me this, but I found his records, he may have had malaria. I talked to other guys in the 4th Marine Division that fought on Saipan and Tinian. He said some of the guys who had fought on Guadalcanal, the conditions were so terrible they had malaria. So I think Bill had malaria, and that's why he missed the battles at Saipan and Tinian. But he caught a horrible battle, February 19, 1945, the battle for Iwo Jima. By this time, he was an infantryman and a sergeant in the 4th Marine Division. He had been in the 1st Marine Division when he was a Marine Raider in Edson's Raiders. But now he's in the 4th Division, and he landed right on the main beaches on February 19, 1945 at Iwo Jima. The Japanese off to the left of where Bill landed, and thousands of troops landed. They couldn't move well because of the ash. The island was a big ash, bunch of ash, and they couldn't move well. Mount Suribachi was off to the left. I think it was about 500 feet high, and the Japanese had dug into it and under it, and they had this whole beach zeroed in for artillery and for excuse me, mortars, as well as small arms fire, and they just shot and slaughtered so many of these Marines and sailors. There were sailors on the beach because everything was such a mess. But anyway, Bill's division immediately went in a little bit and turned to the right, and they worked their way up the end of the island, which is where the general of the Japanese military there at Iwo, named General Kurabayashi, committed suicide on the 26th of March, about 5 weeks after the initial landing. And also from the north end of the island was the last samurai charge, where they would just charge out, and what they did is they charged out, and all the Marines had their arms taken away, their weapons, because they thought the battle was over, and a bunch of the Japanese come out from under a hole. They come out of a hole because they were dug into the island. They come out of a hole, and they slit the throats and slaughtered a lot of airmen that were on the island. But anyway, Bill survived the war. He told me that, we didn't even know the term post-traumatic stress. They talked about later in the 50s, when he was in the war, he would plant a K-bar knife right next to him, stick it in the ground, and have his rifle right between his legs when he slept. The Japanese were notorious for crawling around the islands at night and trying to slit your throat. So anyway, in the 50s then, his wife reached over to touch him one day to wake him up, and he had her right by the throat. Thank God he did not have a weapon, but during the war, his natural instinct would have been to grab a throat and then immediately grab the K-bar knife and cut the head off. So he was still having a lot of problems sleeping and so on. Just a fine man. He always dressed immaculately because he had been so filthy for so many years during 1942, 3, 4, and 5 that he's promised himself he would never be dirty again. And the man, every time I saw him, for about 3 years, I may have known him 4 years, he was dressed immaculately in very expensive clothing, though he didn't have a lot of money. He was worked in a factory, and he just determined he was never going to be dirty again. If you see World War II fellows or service women, thank them, folks, because we owe them a lot. Our freedoms didn't just happen. They came because somebody suffered. Thank you, and we'll see you another time.